Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety with Jill and Tia. And as you can see, we have a special guest with us today.
We do. We do. We're excited. We're excited every week about our topic. But this week is the topic is so relevant to the things that we've been talking about, right? Like when it comes to food safety culture, when it comes to influence, when it comes to building relationships, the whole piece of storytelling, right? Like that's like at the center of all of those conversations. So we're excited to dive deep into the topic with our very special guest.
Tirzah. Tirzah is welcome. And I know we'll welcome you again, but like you're a magical storyteller.
Oh, thank you.
It's really fun. I remember when we first met. So our connection was Learning Journeys, which is a coaching school here in Minnesota for coaches. And I was blown away because Jenny would read one of your stories and I'd be like, how can someone have such beautiful words and articulate it in such like an impactful way?
Mm.
And that's Tirzah. And we get to have her on the show today.
Yay! I am so glad to be with you today. Storytelling has been a love of mine since childhood. I remember begging for more stories, right? So I was that kid. One more story, just one more story. But the way that that translated as I grew older is really that I began to really feel the power of words and the power of words to connect people. And to really, there was a great joke where someone says, words just can't explain. And the person says, really? That's exactly what they do.
That's funny.
So I enjoy searching for the words that explain the things that seem to be just outside of our ability to grab them.
I love
Well,
that.
and that's exactly what we need right now.
Yeah.
In our food safety professional industry and technical roles, we keep talking about how do we connect better with people because we're so data driven. We're science based. We speak numbers and percentages and probabilities, which is all really important. But we also know that that connection with people is decisions are made based on how much we like people and
Yeah.
how do we connect with people and how do we influence people.
Mhm.
And especially in our food safety space, we have, right, the buzzword food safety culture is everywhere. And our audience has been part of hearing Tia and I talk about it's all about changing conversations.
Yes. Yes.
That's how we build a different culture. It's about building leaders that will lean into new conversations and into new leadership skills so that we can move in this space in a meaningful way.
Yeah. Yeah. And leaders who foster an environment where people can talk about different things and where people can have different conversations and where people can share their stories, right? And share and find that common link. So we're excited about that. But before we go any farther, we do want to say hello to our audience out there. Hello, hello. If you are out there, please add a comment because that's how we see you. Otherwise, we can't see you. So say hello, drop an emoji about how you are feeling today. And we always like to check in on the weather. The weather is getting better and hotter around the country, around the globe, right? Depending on, I guess, what side of the equator you're on. But many of us are entering into the summer months, so it might even get in the 90s here in Boston, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't know about the weather up there with you all. Maybe the snow is gone.
I hope so. I hope so.
Come on, tomorrow's June. If we get snow, that would be, well, crazy weather's been everywhere, but I would go to Vegas and bet we're not going to get snow in June.
Right. Well, and I was in Manitoba over the weekend, so Canada, and it was hot and dry. So there's hope.
There's hope. There's hope.
Yeah. No, it was nice enough that I finally got my garden in this weekend. And I have 2 happy helpers, 14-year-old boys.
There you go.
Oh, hey, that's awesome.
Yes.
And
so
I'm done with school, right?
Almost done, but I'm super excited to see how excited they are when we're, end of June, hot sun out, mosquitoes trying to get us, and we're weeding.
Right.
Such life lessons to be had.
Makes for good stories.
Yep, they've done it before, but it's been a couple of years since we've had it in, so it's kind of like reshuffling and rejogging that memory. So,
oh my gosh, I love that. That's awesome. Hello. We're getting some hellos out there. Welcome. We're super excited for you all to be here today with us.
yes, very much so. And if it's your first time joining us, welcome. We're super happy to have you with us. And if you've been here before, thank you for joining us again to talk about storytelling. And if you are new to us, you're probably like, what does Catalyst do? Like, who are they and what do they do? Well, our goal is to make life better for you in food safety and quality and technical roles in food. That is it. How do we make life better?
Yeah.
But we strongly believe that comes from when we step into our leadership skills to support others, to help our well-being, and to really fill the purpose and passion that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And we help lean into that through our coaching-based programs.
Yes. So we are excited to have you all here because we know we have the technical backgrounds, right? And we build all these technical skills, and then we're sort of thrown into leadership and we're thinking, maybe we have this, maybe we don't. But the thing of it is, we've never done it before. We haven't been prepped for it. We've had very little training or read a book, but we haven't been in situations or really our organizations. Let me talk about it from my experience too.
Tell us about it.
Yeah, the experience, or maybe this is my story, right? Like, as we talk about stories, where organizations don't really prepare you for going into leadership. So when you get there, when I got there, right, it's like you have some things in your toolbox, right? I've seen people be leaders, right? I have my own natural style, but you miss out on some things on how do I really create trust and build an environment of psychological safety so people will be open to having different conversations with one another. How do I really step into culture change, right? Like, as we talk about food safety culture, that is a heavy load on top of everything else we have going on. And many times this falls to middle managers who have so much work already on their shoulders. And so in order to turn that ship of culture, right, that could burn us out, which it has burned me out before, right? And has burned many of our clients out. So we really help in that space. And like Jill said, we really help leaders become better leaders to support food safety, to support food safety culture, to support your own personal growth. And one way to do that is through learning storytelling, which is all about our topic today.
Yes. So join us in welcoming our special guest, Tirzah Lewis. She is a master certified narrative coach, and we are so honored to have you with us today, Tirzah.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you. I would love to share a little bit about, just as Tia was talking, my own journey when it comes to leadership and storytelling, which is, I think, something that's instinctive for a lot of people, is that we have certain talents and gifts that people saw as they promote us into a position. And so we're kind of running with those things, but we weren't necessarily trained in those things. And so we always kind of walk into it a little bit, not fully holding the story of me being a leader or me being an excellent leader or a dynamic leader, because we're a little bit afraid that we're going to get found out, that we're running on instinct. But I think what this podcast or LinkedIn Live show and other things can tell you is that if you're engaging in things like this, that you are in the right place, that your instincts are correct, because what they're doing is they're leading you to seek education and conversation that will help to confirm, like, yes, I am going in the right direction, or hold up, maybe I need to pull back a bit. And I feel like that reflects my own story, where I was really instinctively good at doing a lot of this. I worked primarily in government for years. So local government, counties, cities, municipalities, and had that feeling. And it wasn't until I came to coaching where I was just like, the light bulb went off and I was like, oh, this is a thing. This is amazing. Stories do matter. My instincts are correct. And so I spent the last 3.5 years with Learning Journeys, where I met Jill, really honing in on not only just diving into storytelling, diving into people's narratives, but also helping other people just day in and day out figure out those narratives and what they wanted uh, to get from their stories, or how they were telling them and not even realizing what they were communicating to others around them.
Okay, so that definitely needs to have some unpacking.
Mm-hmm.
Because we talk about storytelling, and you just said, well, we're telling people all the time through our stories things about us.
Yes.
What kind of things are we telling people?
Oh, fantastic question. We are telling people constantly what we value, what is most present in our lives, what we are paying attention to by the stories we tell them. Sometimes we think of stories, we think of these grand things, right? Especially if you ever came out of a communications department, right? Communications says, oh, what's the story that we're telling? And they create this grand narrative. But we are walking around sharing information about ourselves all the time in the way that we tell our story. So I'll use this example. I have a good friend who, for years, every time I would call her, I'd say, hey, how's it going? Oh, I'm living the dream. Right. Just that line, this element of sarcasm, really matched kind of how she was approaching life, which is, I'm here, but I'm not really content with this, but it's supposed to be the dream. Right? Like things are supposed to be fine. And so I even approached her one time. I said, what would you say if you were saying something else? Like if I called you and what other thing would you say? Or what goes with the dream? And she's just like, oh, like I've got my job. It's a good job. She started to talk about how her job was a good job and she was paying off debt, all these amazing things. But her automatic reply did not reflect any of that. Right. And so we got to have a conversation about the fact that the automatic response that she would always give came from this place that she didn't even necessarily want to come from. But she never took a second look at that response. So we share our values all the time in the way that we speak, but we just don't realize it. And a lot of times it's actually a truer version of our values that we are sharing in the stories that we tell. Because if we take a look at, you go to a workshop, they give you a list of values. Which ones do you pick? You pick the ones that you think will be, acceptable in the room.
Well received, right?
Right. You pick the ones that you should really, really hold dear. Like I should really hold a value of minimalism because I want to conserve and I want to be here for the planet. And that's a great thing. And the reality is I've got 2 kids who love to hoard cardboard, like every Amazon box.
Goodness.
And so while I want to write that one down, it's not the reality of what I'm living. If I'm sharing people's stories about what I'm doing with my children, it's a value of creativity. And that value of creativity and that value of Earth, responsibility to Mother Earth, they come in conflict with each other.
Right.
And if these come in conflict with each other inside of us, guess what? You've got people walking around in your departments and they've got conflicts clashing and trying to figure out which one gets primacy inside of them. And then they meet their colleagues. And now we have to work together.
Right.
And supposed to have a shared mission and a shared vision of where we're going, right?
And shared values.
And on top of that, yes, the company says here, on high, here are the values you will follow and embrace.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
I love the part of when you were talking about this story that we're telling people all the time. And that's one thing that I noticed just in leadership and with leaders, that we are telling a story every time we speak. And so when sometimes there's a really great example of a leader, a senior director, a VP, a chief level giving their 2 cents. Oh, it's just my 2 cents. Well, it's not just your 2 cents because you're the leader of the organization. So the story that you're telling at this meeting is a story that people are going to take seriously. And so I feel like sometimes leaders don't think about that or don't really connect it to, well, you're seen as a leader in an organization. So your story is a story that people want to latch onto or want to try to incorporate it into the way that they do work. They actually connect it to the values and the mission and the vision of the company. Yes. Right. So knowing that, and that's one of the reasons why leadership is why they say leadership is a lonely place, or leadership is heavy, because everything you're saying, everything you're doing, the stories that you're telling, people are connecting it to a project you might not even know is happening, right? And so like just being mindful of the stories that you're telling every day and making sure it is a real story, an authentic story, representation of your values, right? And if you're in an organization, if you can connect it to the values of the organization and providing a story there and being able to connect it for your teams, that's impactful. Right. Versus, I'm telling these stories or I'm using common lines and people are taking it as like gospel versus like, oh, that's just your opinion, or that's just a 2 cents worth of insight.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like the exchange rate, right? So I'm up in Canada and it's like $1.48 Canadian to $1 US. Well, you think we're giving an even exchange, and they're just like, oh no, there's 48 more cents that I have to contend with because this person's a leader in the organization. So I'm taking it just that little bit extra to heart.
Yes.
And that might not have been our intent as a leader.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think really plays into, when we were kind of preparing for today, and you brought out some really good, things to explore related to our stories and leadership.
Yes.
And I thought this might be a great time to kind of to navigate through those and talk about like, how do they play into our leadership stories and I think even the practical part of, the leaders that we have that are joining us today. And you all know that we always say, whether you are by title or not, you are still a leader.
Yes.
So of course, that's all of you, all of us. Yeah. We're part of that. And so I think it's really, what a gift you have for us today to talk about, like, how do we write our leadership story? How do we edit our leadership story?
Yeah.
Because, speaking from experience, I've tiptoed into the wrong direction and had to like save it, correct it.
Yes.
But how do we do that in a way that is authentic, it honors us, and it honors others? And I think that's part of the storytelling.
Yeah. I would love to dive into that. So part of the first thing I'm going to say is to take time, make time, borrow time to do this. This is not an accidental or an incidental process.
Right?
Yes.
So it might be that you say, you know what, I am going to think about this for 30 minutes at this time, and I'm going to block it on my calendar. Some people, if it's not on their calendar, they don't touch it. Other people, it might be like, you know what, turn off the radio, turn off the podcast. I love podcasts, but that's somebody else's story in your brain coming through your ears. Turn it off and consider a piece, because sometimes it's like, I can't do all of it. And I'll give you those pieces to consider in a moment. But, it might be, I'm going to do that on the drive home. I love my podcast time, but I'm going to turn off the podcast. I'm going to think about this one thing on the drive home and make some decisions and some determinations for myself. But you have to give yourself time to do it. It doesn't happen by accident. So that's the first thing. The next thing is to consider what personal values are at play in your life, just to take stock of what's happening in my life, in my relationships, in my family life, at work, right? And a really quick little fun thing that I like to do is I like to say, okay, what's showing up? And if they were part of a band, any type of band, it could be a symphony, could be an orchestra, could be a girl band, a hair band, whatever you're into. Use that metaphor or that analogy to figure out who's the lead singer. Who do I shove in the back on the drums, right? How important are the drums? Are they keeping the beat actually for me? And to just play with that idea so that you can begin to see like what's showing up, because the reality is that our values are not static. They are dynamic,
Mhm.
and we trade them all the time. We put them in different places. We have different roles. I tell people that here's an example. If I value autonomy, I value being an independent individual, and I go back into my family of origin, a lot of times I then trade autonomy for harmony.
Mm.
I want today to just go calm,
Right. Yeah.
get through it.
Yes.
Right.
And how many, that's a really great example of things that actually play out at work as well.
Mhm.
Yes.
Here in my space with my team, I want us to have autonomy. But then when I maybe move into a different circle where I'm not as maybe as comfortable or understanding their values, or I'm going to call it the status management of where I'm at,
Mhm. Yeah.
then we sometimes trade in those values.
Right.
Yes.
And using that
Probably
same,
unintentionally.
exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not aware that they're at play of what I am giving up for the other.
Yeah.
So I'm with my team. I'm like, we're going to do it. Here's how we're going to do it. I talk to my senior, to my senior leader, and they say, oh no, I think we should do it this way. And without even knowing it, I trade that autonomy for harmony, because that's how I've kind of made my way through the organization.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't even push back. I say, oh, okay, I guess that's how we're doing it.
Yes.
But then what happens? I come back to my team and I say, I'm with you, but they up there want us to do it this way. Right?
Yeah.
But what's the effect of
Pointing
that?
the finger somewhere else because you personally decided to trade some values.
Right.
Yes.
And I mean, even thinking about it, I think this is very insightful, because I think a lot of people say, I have these values, and they try to stick with them, right? And they feel like that they have to stand in them every single moment of the day. But then I think there's pros and cons of everything, right? Like there's some cons of like, well, I'm going to give in every time, because I want this harmony piece, and that's what I'm trading. But there's also a positive of doing that sometimes, right? Where it's like, this is the most important thing for us to have this harmony. So I'm going to back away because maybe I'm not as passionate about the topic, or maybe I'm not the expert, or whatever it happens to be, right? Like this is not my thing to kind of lead, right? So I'll take a back seat for harmony. And then there's times that you do need to speak up. You need to say, wait, time out. Let me just make sure I understand, because I have a team that I've been saying this message to. I want to make sure that I'm aligned and that it's within my team values on the path we're going to go down. And so it's almost like this piece of this balance, but also understanding that like it's okay. It's okay to have this balance. It's okay to mold and shift when it makes sense.
Exactly. And okay, I'll soapbox and then I'll come back to my points. But we do live in a culture where people have given, remember, I love words, authenticity. So people say, well, you have to be authentic, which means the interpretation we've given it is that I have to stand absolutely in this value 100% all the time. When the reality is, I think what people are looking for as an authentic leader is someone who is open, who will not make the decision in the shadows.
Yes.
But say, here are all the things at play, and here are the things that I am considering when we make this decision. So I am considering harmony with our leadership and their vision and our autonomy to be able to do this work. So in that, can I bring my team in and say, can we have a conversation about what pieces of this, even if it's directed from on high, what pieces of this still actually are in our control, and how do we want to make those happen?
Yes.
Right. So sometimes it's even taking a look at, when I look at these values, what is my definition of them, so that I can adequately know how I present them to my team, to the people I work with, to the people that work above me, because I might say no. They might come back and say, no, this is worth fighting for. We know that this way of doing it will be better. And you can say, okay, I'm going to take that above.
Right. Yes.
Because now I understand what it is I'm upholding.
Right.
Right.
Ooh, that discernment of how that plays out is so powerful. because in food safety and quality, we often feel that we have to compromise, that we have to give in, all of these words that create this story around how we show up versus stepping in, and giving away our power as well.
Yes.
Versus stepping in and saying, actually, this is how it looks. And here, like you said, here are the things we can consider that we get to decide on what parts we keep and which parts maybe we go back to the drawing board on.
Yeah. Yes. And doing this work, like you said, it is intentional, right? Like to know yourself and to know what's important and to have this really what is authenticity. You have to take that time to learn yourself and to know yourself, right? Because then like it's funny, like some comments are coming in agreeing with what we're talking about. And Claire, I love her comment, I value autonomy until there's a bug in the house that I don't know myself. I'm right there, right?
That is so Tia, let me tell you.
Jill knows. I'm like, oh my God, there's a bug. And everyone's like, that's the smallest bug I've ever seen. And I'm like, I still can't kill it. I still can't move it. I still can't touch it, right? So I get that. And because we are true to ourselves, Claire, we know that we are being our authentic selves, right? And we're transparent. We let people know, not my area, right?
Yeah, but I love how Tirzah, how you explained it too, because I think it gives us permission to be human.
Ooh, yes.
Because speaking from my own experience, when I've stepped outside of what I believe people need me to be, because I'm considering some other option, I can feel like I'm not being authentic. And that I perhaps am letting people down. But when we look at it from this lens that you've talked about with these other factors of the story and our values, it gives us permission to be human, to be able to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's a couple. It was a beautiful aside. But yeah, so one, take time. Two, like just your own values. And if you can't figure out what your values are, because sometimes that's tough, we use this in learning journeys, so I'm going to share it here. We ask people to share a story about a person who defends you, takes up for you, is a good friend to you. Share it with someone else, but what you're going to ask them to do is to listen for the values they hear inside of the story you're telling. So it could be a story about a road trip that you took, anything, right, with that individual and how they showed up for you. And let that person just say, I just want you to listen for what are the values that show up in this story. And that will give you a place to start from where you can say, oh yeah, that was there. Humor is there. But I don't know, responsibility, I have to think on that,
Yeah.
It can give you something to chew on and to start with. The next thing that I would suggest is that you take a look. It's amazing. I'm going to say it, y'all. It's amazing how many of our leaders don't actually know our organizational values.
Do you mean the actual value itself or how it's supposed to be applied and what it means?
Both.
Right.
It's amazing how many folks are just like, oh, I don't know. Or, like the first two, but then like, especially if your organization got real happy with it,
Right.
like 10, but your staff is looking to you to figure out what are the org's values and how do I translate them to my job?
Yes.
Well, if you've never considered that for yourself, then how do you help them?
Yes.
Right. So as a leader in this organization, a leader at any level, so, if you're a person out here and you're a front desk receptionist, I have been in some offices where the receptionist dictates the entire mood of the floor. So
true. Absolutely.
So, yeah, but to take a look at the organization's values and just think for yourself, like, what does this actually mean for me in the organization? And I mean, if you have time and ability and inclination, maybe asking leadership or trying to, find it on the website, the external site, the intranet. When we say we value diversity, when we say we value integrity, when we say we value safety, what do we mean by safety?
Yes.
So my husband works for a school bus company, and I sat down with him. He's a mechanic and an auto body tech. And I was like, what do you mean when you say we value safety? And it was amazing. Like, I didn't even know how much he thought about this, but he's just like, we transport people's children. This is their heart. This is their everything. So
Mhm.
when I'm working on disc brakes, it matters because
Yeah.
I need to make sure that this bus transports these children safely. So
Yeah.
that for him is what he meant by safety.
Mhm.
Now that's a fantastic story,
Yes.
right? That I'm almost sure none of his management has asked him.
Mm.
None of his management really knows
Wow.
what gets him there in the morning, 3 hours early when there's a snowstorm,
Yeah.
when he knows he may or may not. Like, nobody told him he had to go do it, but he's just like, we've got to get these buses out. We've got to get them out safe.
Yeah.
They didn't call off school yet, so I'm going to get up early and go. That's the story that's playing in his mind. So not only to ask it for yourself and figure it out for yourself, ask it of your people.
Yes.
It might be in a team meeting and you say, you know what, for the next 20 minutes, what I'd like to do is just kick it out here. We have this value of safety. How do you translate that? What do you think of when you think of safety? What comes to mind? And they will begin to tell you the stories.
Yes.
And you get the privilege of listening to them and incorporating them into how you then lead, because now you know what makes them tick.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You just don't know you don't just know what they do, the tasks they complete, the things that are on their checklists. Now you know what makes them actually pick up that checklist and say, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this. Okay, I'm going to go here next. You learn a little bit about how they maneuver in their day-to-day.
Yes, yes. And you also learn like why they don't do the things that they don't do.
Yes.
Right? And because maybe, just take it for example, your husband. Maybe there's something they want to do and he hasn't been prioritizing it. Probably because he doesn't see it falling underneath the safety of children. Probably because it doesn't fall underneath some of the other values that he has around his role.
Yes.
And understanding that. And that doesn't mean, okay, it's not a part of the values, so, I'm not going to make my team do it. But it's really around how do you connect the things that you're doing every day, or you're trying to influence the organization to do, or you're trying to roll out to your team. Connecting that to the values is so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll tell you something it's valuable to me, but he forgets to do it all the time. He constantly forgets to punch himself out at work. Like, he'll come home and be like, oh, I didn't punch out. I got to call my supervisor. This should drive him crazy. But it's like, but I know he believes in safety. I know he believes, if we go through the different values of the organization, is there another one where I can say, this is really a part of this? This is a part of fairness. And can I appeal to his fairness to say, I want to fairly pay you.
Right.
Punch out on time because I'm tired of you calling me. No.
Right. Yes. So true.
But Tirzah, what I also really like about this approach, and this is part of what we do in our strategic leader program with values, but it's the having everybody tell their story around it. Because at least, and I'd love to hear from our audience how they've encountered this. But often I see organizations, like I said, they bring down the values on high. Yeah. Here is what you will do, and here is how they look. Yes. Now go forth. Yeah. And everybody goes, and they're like, okay, let's just get back to our work that we do. And they're not brought in. They're not talked about more unless somebody's savvy enough to be like, because they need to use it to prove a point, and it comes up that one time, but it's not embedded in how they work. Yes. And I sometimes wonder, is part of that because so often it seems that values, because the meaning is what's important. Like when I see integrity, it means something different to everybody on how it plays out.
Right. Yeah.
What is it that you see as kind of that gap of orgs being able to help? Is it bring forth those values or communicate those values? Is it what's the gap in that you've seen, because you've done a lot of work in this space?
Yeah. So it's kind of threefold. Number one, it is that they bring them from on high and they forget that they've had a 4-month journey with them down the mountain. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, here you go, have these. And people are like, what are these? Like, and your work needs to change to reflect these tomorrow.
Right.
What? I just saw these. True. It takes me longer to break in a pair of shoes. Like, come on. Give me a little time. So that's one, and it's kind of a change management piece to it. But the other is that, as you were talking, there's nothing internally. Like, they give us the stories. I've had this really challenging time actually with some with a group in transit, that's in the transit space. And the challenge was, so we brought them down from on high, here you go, but there's no internal story, and there's no internal connection to me, and the way I think, and that says, this, I don't have a place to hang this particular value. So you handed me a value. It's not necessarily one that I inherently have right now, or that's playing out in my role or my world. And now I don't have a place to hang it inside of myself. So the challenge that I've had is, they're just like, I'll give them an example, from, I don't know, yonder transit organization over there. And they're like, I don't know, that one doesn't really hit. Like,
Right.
they constantly was like, no, I need it. I don't understand. I don't understand. I don't understand. And I was getting really frustrated till I realized, you know what? They're not going to understand until it comes literally from the person sitting next to them.
Yeah.
And so, rather than giving more examples, opening it up for them to share their examples of what this is and how it shows up in their day to day. So that the example, being in Minneapolis, I'll use some terms for us, say our transit networks. So the example isn't from like the Seattle or, the San Francisco, like, what is it called? The electrical system.
Yeah, their train system. I don't know if
The
they call it
streetcars. Yeah. Like,
streetcars.
a streetcar example is fine. I don't know how it translates to me. Like, the example has to come out of them, because it has to say, like, the green line that runs down whatever avenue.
Yeah. Yes.
And then I get it.
Yes.
It's directly my world. And the only way to get that is to open up for them to share their stories around it.
Yes. That is so important. That's so important, because like you said, people struggle to relate it to other things that might not impact them. It's actually one of the reasons why, in food safety and quality, we have recalls, right, in the industry, and we share them amongst our own groups. Like, oh, so-and-so had a recall, like, this could be us. Or this person has this company has a recall, this could be us. But if people don't really think about what our story is, and examples, I really like to pull out, this could be us because remember this time, remember this shared story we had, remember this time here in our organization. If everything aligned, then that could be us based on our story. And then things start to click, like, oh yeah, that's right, I have seen that before, or, oh, we did deal with that, but we caught it before it left the facility. So like hearing, but it's really those shared stories, those stories, internal stories, that make the most impact.
Most people are not self-centered, but we are self-centric. Like, we are thinking about ourselves all the time. Right. And so, and then once you get those, if because again, you might not have control. The values came from on high. Okay. What does that mean to us? Inside of that, the second step to that is then saying, let's, if you're a visual group, you put them up on the board, right? Or have people write if they need to, but collect it somehow and say, these are all of our stories. What are the things that we are seeing that are common themes? What are the common threads? What are the common words? Because then what you're going to do is you're going to pull out from the group, and now they're coming together as one, right? Yeah. So they went from individuals to a group. We're going to pull out the things that describe this in a way we deeply understand.
Yes.
Because these words hold a place inside of me.
Yes. Yeah. That makes so much sense. It's one thing that we talked about too, around like leadership, telling these stories, right, around values, and people pulling out their own stories around values. A couple of comments bring up that, they left the organization because the values were not lived, or what management says is not necessarily what they value. So, even talking about what management says or living values, those are those stories that we're telling people every day, right? That we are creating around us. And the rest of us is trying to put this story together on how does the story you're telling me relate to the values that I know this organization has, right? Or the situations that I'm in every day, how does that relate to the values of this organization? And we're doing that, people in the organization doing that all the time, and that ultimately bubbles up into what type of culture you're having.
Yes.
Well, and T, I think that's important because every organization has values. And I think this is what I wish I would have learned earlier, but I did learn it at some point, to be able to ask those questions, to lean in and say, gosh, if we have a value of integrity, I'm not following how this maybe links to that or demonstrates that. Can you tell me more about how you see those things playing out here?
Yes.
And I think leaning into that space, when I finally learned that that was okay and part of really that learning and being curious process, that's what helped us actually start stepping as a team further into living those values.
Yeah.
Because otherwise something would happen and we'd just be like, oh, that's who they are, or that's how that happens, or this is what. But when we started being more open about explaining how those fit, that was really powerful.
Yes.
And I think about like how we can do that more even in food safety, as we think about food safety culture and wanting to change conversations and what are the things we value. So, we always have gosh, there's not enough time and not enough money. Yeah. How does that relate to our value of food safety and protecting public health?
Yeah.
When we have had this capital request turned down for 3 years, when we don't allow for our budgets to have development for better leaders or developing technical skills.
Yes.
How does that demonstrate the value?
Right.
Yeah.
And then even thinking about like values, that the things that make sense to food safety is like if there's a food safety value or if there's a value around integrity or doing the right
diversity, communication.
Right. But it's like, even as you look at other values, like, there's almost always a value around we want to move quickly, right? Like, or we want to innovate. That also relates to the work that we're doing around food safety culture, right? Like, we want to enable that innovation while keeping people safe. And so I love, Tirzah, the way that you're even going through this exercise, making intentional time, right, to go through this exercise and really think about, what are my values? And if you're doing it from an organization standpoint, what are the organization values? And then what are the shared stories around those? And then if you are a leader, so if you're listening and you are a leader, some of the best cultures that I see, executive leadership talks about values all the time. And they don't just talk about it in the sense of like, I'm reading a slide or anything. They're sharing stories about the values that they have encountered at the organization, or stories that the organization wants, others to know. Yeah. Or, it could be examples of them visiting, facilities, and they're bringing out those. It's always a story wrapped around how people are living those values. And then you start to wrap into like, even say like you're at a facility that does not have has a poor culture. The rest of the organization might be doing fine. This facility is not. Then people at the facility can see that, okay, the organization has these values and people are living these values. The problem is really right here at home. So how do I bring those stories here at home? Or how do I get those stories here at home and show examples of like, this is what it means to live with integrity, right? Within the organization. This is what the organization is doing. Other facilities are doing to live that value. How can we make different decisions here? Yeah. Right? How can we do things differently to live that value here at this facility? And so it's just another way of like, just communicating those stories every chance that you can get, so that people are aligned on what it means for the organization. They're aligned on the stories. Like, think about how many stories you share because someone else shared it and you're like, yes, there was this time that this happened. And like, you weren't even connected, but someone told the story and now you're telling the story, right? And that's how stories spread.
Yes, absolutely. You can invite people to share your story if they don't have one for themselves, or you can also invite them to be more open to looking around for what stories pop up now that it's on their mind.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, Tirzah, that brings up a question because, yesterday, this even came up as we were talking about how do we look past the details of what someone's telling us to really understand or see the values, beliefs that they're bringing forth.
Yes, yeah.
Can you tell us more about that? Because I think that's an area where, and especially because we're typically data and science driven, we're like, we heard all the details. And we're like, oh, what's the message? What's the message behind the message almost? How do we lean into that? How do we find that?
Yes. So I'll give you three ways. One is because you almost never get it the second time around. If someone comes and they're telling a story, listen, keep your ear out for emotion, right? Usually in our formal presentations, we're very good and we are in our professional mode. So I will be very dry, right? But when people are just talking, they usually have emotion. If it's excitement, if it's frustration, and ask for confirmation of what you're hearing. You can ask for confirmation without even labeling it. So you can say, okay, I hear a lot of emotion around this. And first, is it okay if I first ask, like, what are you feeling about this? Right. And then I'd like to get to the details. I promise you we're going to go there. But what are you even just feeling about this? Because we self-edit. So by the time the person tells it the second time around, they will have self-edited the emotion out. And so you don't necessarily hear, like, where is this showing up for them, like, emotionally, like in, is it passion that I'm hearing or frustration? Is it, is it I'm fed up, or is it I want to do this and I'm just feeling so blocked right now by the powers or whatever that are going on. And that can give you some amazing insight that you don't normally get. So that first time, if you can listen for emotion when somebody, and even ask about it, I hear a lot of emotion. I promise we'll get to the details because I know those are important, but what are you feeling right now? Like, what are you experiencing in this moment? So that's one question that'll get you some insight that people don't normally get. The second is listening for values, right? Listening for what the person is valuing. But the third is just, again, the power of questions. And you kind of got to engage your inner investigator. I literally, when I first started coaching, would write down on a piece of paper, what, where, when, how, like, so what exactly is happening? When this happens, what is the result? Like, what happens? Okay. When does this happen? Where? How? But the big one that I love is the how. The relationship between this and that. Right? So all of this is happening. You've told me all these details because people also like to word vomit details. When all of these details are out of the individual, say, okay, so how does that relate to whatever else? How is that showing up or relating to how people are showing up at work?
Yes.
How is that relating to your morale? Right? So you can relate it back to a culture question. All these details, how do they actually play out in the workplace? What are you seeing because of that? So questions can become your friend. And if you forget all of the rest of it, just ask the relational question. How does this relate to that? How do all of these details actually relate to the customer experience? Actually relate to our communications, our communications that are going out there, actually relate to what's happening on third shift with people not getting along.
Right. Yes. I think these are so powerful because these are the things that we don't learn before we go into leadership, right?
No.
And it's something that it's not one of those things that you can just flip a switch and it's on. You really have to practice these things, right? Like you have to practice, you have to be in situations. You have to learn from other leaders. That's one thing that we focus on at Catalyst is like giving time and space for that reflection and practice and accountability, because it's not a one size fits all. It's not like a 20-minute training or even an hour training, right? It's about how do I collect this information, right? From something like real talk or training or whatever it happens to be. And then how do I practice it? every time I'm in a situation? How do I practice having those conversations, asking questions, messing up and asking again, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
how do I do that in my world? And what we find is that if people are not intentionally taking the time to do it, we miss it. We get overwhelmed, we get burnt out, we have too much on our plate, and we just don't have time to ask people the questions of who, what, when. We don't have time to do that. So we're just going to barrel through. And then we realize at the end, man, why is our culture the way that it is?
Yeah.
Well, and I always find it fascinating with stories that our brains don't like incomplete stories.
Yes.
And how we fill those in. So even that awareness, Tia, how many times have I been like, okay, the story I'm telling myself about this is X.
Right. Yes.
And I need to practice that even more. But I think recognizing that we've created a story and which parts of those do we actually know anything about?
Yes.
Or have we made up?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And
I would love everybody take what Jill just said. The story I'm telling myself about this is, and start with that, if nothing else. So maybe it's not that I'm even telling my story. This is the story I'm making up in my head. What about this is accurate?
Right.
What might not be accurate? What might I be missing?
Yeah.
Even asking that is just tremendous. And people will be like, okay, well, you got this part and this part right. But what you really don't understand and what they give you after that phrase is gold.
Right. Yes.
And it's so disarming.
Yes.
So the number of times I've used it to be like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but the story I'm telling myself in my head is this. Is that, tell me, am I on track, or what parts are right there or not?
Yeah.
And people, then it's not me. I mean, it is me, but it's out here then. Like it's the story out here. And so it's easier to talk about it versus feeling like I've done something or somebody else has maybe done something. It's out here between us to talk about.
Yeah. I would even say too, like as I think that's great. Just even as a leader on what type of stories you make up, right? And the type of stories that you're telling yourself and how you fill in those gaps, because that even makes you even more self-aware on where your values lie, right? What details of the story do you feel like you need, right, to even move forward, whether someone's giving you that part or not? You're going to fill it in because that's just how your brain is wired, and that's what you need in order to make a decision or whatever it happens to be. But the more you understand that about yourself, the more you can make different decisions, right? The more you can say, okay, I need to ask these type of questions. Otherwise, I know I'm going to make a story up in my head. Or I've made the story up in my head, and many times it's not the right version. So how do I, sort of stop myself and again, ask really great questions in order for me to find the real story? And so, it's as a leader or just even as a being on earth, right? It's great to even just learn from that and say, okay, what stories do I typically make up because of my own values, because of my own upbringing, because of my own environment, right? What stories do I continuously make up? And then how do I recognize that in the time and say, oh, I know I'm making up a story. I can feel it, right? I can feel the emotion. I can hear the words start to play, and then I can take a step back and say, Tia, this is you, right? Like you are making this story up. So let's take a step back and let's ask some questions.
Yeah. Now, in the vein of asking questions, I will give us one caveat, and that is, unless you are specifically everybody looking at a process, do not ask the question why. We've heard the 5 whys. That works phenomenally for processes. Processes don't have feelings, but people do. And immediately, whenever you ask why, and I say it because I know it's some people's favorite question. It's just I'm inquisitive, and so I ask why. Why, so why can't I ask why? Haha, I will tell you. Because no matter how nicely you ask it, it puts the person in a position where they have to defend what they just said.
Yeah.
Right. And so people become defensive. And even if I would be willing to possibly look at it, now I feel like I have to uphold it. And so it just kind of stops that flow of creativity. The thing that I think just increases it exponentially is the relational question. How does this relate to that?
Yes.
That gets the stories flowing.
Mm-hmm. And that's important as you talk to technical leaders, because we are used to problem solving, right? Diving deep, getting to the root cause, right? And solving out the little blip in the process. Like that's how we are wired, like that's how we are trained, right?
I think that's how we've been taught.
That's how we've been taught. Exactly.
So when we think about how, and that's a great example of how do we change that conversation to get a different outcome?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Ooh, okay. Our time goes so quick, and we have a few minutes left. And we've talked about a lot of different spaces, factors related to stories. But Tirzah, is there like one takeaway or two takeaways that you hope our audience walks away with today?
Yeah. So there's two. One is to share your story so that you can hear your story. And I love that you said that we love to hear complete stories. We don't like when a story is not complete. And I think that gets in the way of us sharing our stories sometimes as leaders, because we feel like I'm not there yet, right? I'm not where I want to be yet. But if we can pick out one incident, one moment, where it went well or it didn't go well, and just share it and then share what I learned from it, then that helps to resolve the story. Right? It's not just that this is what happened. It's this is what happened, and this is what I actually learned from it. So this is what happened when things went great and it was amazing. And what I learned was this is what happens when I got knocked flat on my back and didn't think I could get back up. But what I saw from that angle that I couldn't see any other place was this.
Mm-hmm.
So you can use what you learned from it to round out your story. So, and I tell people this in my training classes: share to your level of comfort. You don't have to go out and share some super vulnerable story that you don't, in all these spaces, and you don't know if it's going to come back, but share something. Yes. And then ask them, what do you hear in my story that maybe I'm missing that you heard that was really, that stood out to you. So you share so that you can hear your own story. The reason I say to do that is because when you hear back what people say and realize how they have heard you, you realize the value of what you doing that for others will be.
Yeah.
Right? When you solicit their story and then you share back with them what you heard, you realize how powerful it is. Like, oh my gosh, you're like, I just unlocked a superpower. Right? The second thing that I want to share with folks is it can seem like a lot. We talked about a lot of things today. So go back, hit the replay up, leave a comment. So go back and hit up the replay and just pull out one thing and say, you know what? I want to try an experiment around this. Just think of it as an experiment, right? Mm-hmm. And then you take off some of the pressure of it having to be right or perfect or work.
Yes.
Because you'll always, no matter what it is, if you run the experiment, you will get a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And then you share that story. And the more you share those stories, the more your staff begins to share stories with you, and you build a stronger team and a stronger, even professional network that way.
Yes.
I love this. I was laughing because, as you say, hit replay. You may have noticed I've been taking notes because I've been looking down, and I'm like, just stop. You can do the replay.
But we do. We have the replays up. We have them on our blog. We have them on our YouTube channel. So absolutely, this is one that I would definitely go back and just pull some things out, right? Because storytelling is so powerful. It's powerful when it comes to building relationships. It's powerful when it comes to influence. It's powerful when it comes to culture, right? Mm-hmm. And those are all the things there are probably the top 3 things we hear all the time in food safety and quality is how do I build relationships? How do I influence? And how do I help change our culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think what I love about what we're talking about is how to apply it for us. Because this leadership starts with us.
Yes.
With all of you out there. Yeah. It's not about the story we're going to tell about our food safety culture. This is about us and our connecting and our stories that we're sharing.
Yes.
And inviting others to share stories as well.
Absolutely. Jill, like that is also a takeaway. And one thing that people miss with culture is that culture is really, it's really not about everyone else, right? It's really about you and how you show up every day and how are you interacting with people? How are you building relationships? How are you cultivating a place of conversation and safety and trust? That's really what it's about. It's about how are you interacting with others, right? How are you creating a culture that you want it to be, right? How are you fostering?
It's how you are being the catalyst.
There we go.
Hey.
Love it. Oh, well, Tirzah, it has been incredible. And this is like a gold mine episode. We have to tag it. Gosh. And
thank you to our audience for being here.
Yes.
Adding your
hanging out
and your comments, because that's how we're learning, right? We're hearing your stories and we learn from those every single time. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Oh, gosh. And next week, we'll be here, same time, same place. We have Jim Miller of Saldesia, the goddess of food safety, joining us to talk about how do we set people up for success with the right tools. So not only physically the right tools, but other leadership tools as well.
Absolutely.
So join us for that. And coming up in just a few weeks, we have a special LinkedIn Live that will be hosted on Zoom so we can have interaction. And it is how to get dollars for development.
Yes.
Because for us to be better leaders, to move into storytelling, to have the awareness and the reflection that we talked about today and more, we need to be able to move into that space. And one way is how do we get the resources to create the space to be intentional. So stay tuned. It's going to be posted out there. So register for it because you're going to need to register so that you get the link to be able to join us.
Yes, and we love our Zoom meetings because then we could see you. So we are excited about that.
Absolutely. So thank you once again, Tirzah. It's been amazing.
Pleasure.
So it's our honor to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see everyone next week.
All right. Bye-bye.